somebody. And the tragedy is the theft is so often close to the people that are pretending that they help. So yes, they steal some credit and money, build houses for the poor never end up in the houses and they lose them. At the same time, the builders and others bring all the money. Who gets the money when you go to war? The military-industrial complex. They're the ones who get help with that. Last week there was a proposal in Washington by the administration that we should sell $50 billion in grant loans to buy these weapons for the Middle East. $50 billion of weapons. You know, here we have a powder keg over there. We're in the middle of it, and we want to send them more weapons. I wonder who's going to make any profits off those. You know, it just makes no sense whatsoever, and that is why I think we should still argue the case for American sovereignty. Should be answered. Because the only society that can take care of the maximum number of people is freedom. Free market, sound money is the only system that has ever eradicated poverty, enhanced the growth of the middle class, and gotten rid of starvation and famine. And unfortunately, in my lifetime, I've seen that slipping away. And we can expect those problems again. That's why the people are upset, because they see it. Although the government says everything is okay, they know their standard of living is going down. They know they need 2 incomes to just make ends meet. And they don't know what's going to happen on the next day or the next week. But the middle class, when you wipe out a currency, when you spend too much, you wipe out a currency, there's a transfer of wealth. The middle class and the poor aren't treated right. They get the brunt of the inflation. Their cost goes up much faster than anybody else, and yet Wall Street and others can do quite well. Whoever gets the money first does well. So if the Fed creates the credit, the Treasury spends it, and they go and they buy weapons or whatever, or it goes through the banking system, they have all the benefits. By the time it circulates, the tax, the inflation tax, is on the poor people. And yet, the bleeding hearts are saying, we're going to take care of the poor people. Only freedom can really be compassionate. That's why we struggle. They say it's not practical, but I believe what we're doing today is so impractical. I think our solution in the Constitution, that is what is practical. Another area that we generally will get attacked on because we don't want bureaucrats coming bearing down on us. Right now we have 90,000 federal bureaucrats carrying guns. I wonder what the founders would have thought of that. They put up with a lot less British guns on this country before they got tired of all. But you know, whether it's OSHA agents or EPA agents or Fish and Wildlife people or IRS agents, they're all carrying guns because they're getting worried because the people are getting restless. Yeah. But one thing that they always charge us is that we don't care about the environment. But you don't need bureaucrats in Washington. You know, I use Pittsburgh as an example when I talk about the environment. When I was a kid, Pittsburgh was a dirty city. The clouds were there and you couldn't see the sun sometimes. And you know what? Pittsburgh got cleaned up without the EPA. In 1900, the worst hurricane we ever had was in Galveston. I represent Galveston at the present time. The city was just wiped off. There was no FEMA, there was no Department of Homeland Security. They rebuilt the city, they put in a wall, the wall still stands, and yet today, what do we say? We have a hurricane that comes into Louisiana and Texas. We expect the federal government to come in and solve the problem. Typically, the efficiency of the federal government couldn't have been more blatant about how they handled Katrina last year. What did they do? They bought all those trailers that never got used, and poisoned people, wasted money, and then they started passing out checks. Can you imagine the surprise? How many of us would be surprised? They're passing out checks, $2,000, everybody that suffered. Did you know what? People came in that didn't even live there, and they picked up a check. And then our government decided, well, let's go collect it. And now they're out trying to round them up and collect that money again. You know, really practical. But central economic planning does we have a tough job ahead of us, because too many of our fellow Americans have lost confidence. They've lost an understanding, they've lost confidence that freedom really works, and freedom does work. But the good part of this story is that the problems are out there. A lot of people know about it, but there are a lot of friends out there. There's a lot of friends in this audience, and our numbers are growing. They are much larger than I ever dreamed of. And the message is very receptive to everybody. They're looking at it, they're looking for answers. So that is good news. And the good news also is that when the Soviet system collapsed, they didn't have the traditions that we have. They didn't have traditions of private property and markets and the Constitution and civil liberties. We do, and we understand it. And that's the message. The message is the Constitution. That if we have a problem, and if they're willing to change before the problem hits, all we have to do is restore the greatness of America by looking at our traditions. And I believe we can win the fight. Don't care that if you legalize freedom, people might do some things that we don't approve, and that is true. That is true. But in a free society, they should be responsible for their own act, and they should suffer the consequences. The real responsible of education should be with the parents, not with the state. But what we need to do, though, is to make sure that enough people realize that the answers are very clear and they are available to us. Today, there are so many more groups, and I mentioned, of course, the idea of people organizing and coming together on the internet. But when I became interested in the ideas of liberty, it was probably in the 1950s and early 1960s. It was very difficult to get the information I wanted. I had to search, and you had to find an organization that might print some books. But today, there are many, many organizations. So the message has spread. Our numbers are much larger than anybody ever dreamed. And it's going to continue. And it seems like it's contagious. And right now, I think it's sort of like something got out of the squeeze bottle and they're not going to put it back in. You don't care about the poor people. You don't care about people's personal behavior. They might do things that you don't like. You don't care about the poor and the suffering. Because when I talk about non-intervention, they always say, oh yeah, I can understand this comes home from Iraq, but this goes to Darfur. I said, no, you can't do that. Non-intervention is non-intervention. Besides, if you go to Darfur for humanitarian reasons, the food or whatever you send gets taken over by the military. It's just part of their civil wars that are going on. You want to go to Darfur or Iraq, go on your own. Take your own money. Take your own guns. The principle that we have to follow is that we should have goals, and we should strive for excellence, and we should strive for virtue. But it has to be done voluntarily. You have to do it by setting good examples. If we want the people around the world to look to us and live like we do, we want to spread our message, we should do a good job. We should be free and prosperous and welcome people and trade with you. Just think of the difference of how we got involved in Vietnam. Yes, we went to Vietnam after having been in Korea. We go to Vietnam and we're going to impose on them our will to make sure they don't become communists. So we go out there and we lose 60,000 men, and finally we come home. And I was in the service at the time. I was in the service from 63 to 68. And no, I did not go to Vietnam, but I was very much aware of the conditions at that time. So we come home, and there were problems right after we left. It didn't get better overnight. But then we more or less followed what the founders have told us. Try to get along with people, talk to people, and trade with them. We trade with Vietnam. We visit Vietnam. We invest in Vietnam. The president of Vietnam comes here and visits us. Just think of what we achieved with peace versus what we lost with war. I mean,